Okay, can everybody see that? Nods are fine. Yeah, brilliant. Right. So welcome to Why iRecord. So for those who don't know me, my name's Keiron and I manage the BioLinks project. But in addition to that, in my spare time, I'm the chair of the Ecology and Entomology Committee with London Natural History Society, and I'm the national recorder for earthworms. So I have a lot of involvement with the biological recording sector outside of work as well. So this presentation is really about two things. It's why choose iRecord and my reasons for doing that, and why I personally think biological recording is important as well. So I thought I'd start with a thank you for those that filled in the survey that I sent out in advance of this. And I asked a couple of questions to try and get a feel for what the level of people attending this session would be. So thank you to the 74 people that responded to the survey. Two questions that I asked were, have you submitted biological records before, and have you used iRecord before? So with the submission of records, we can see that over three quarters of you have submitted records before, but with about a quarter of you only doing it fairly infrequently. And then really interestingly, only just over half of you have used, over half of you have used iRecord before. So it seems like a lot of the people that have submitted records have actually used iRecord before. So that gives us an idea that there are a few people here that are completely new to this, and some people that have some experience, with a quarter of people, well, with nearly half of the group actually using iRecord regularly. So I've tried to put some stuff together that will be relevant to everybody, or at least bits of it to everybody. So one of the things that I asked as well was, what would you like to get out of this virtual meetup? And the responses that I got were quite varied. 72 people answered the question. So I categorise them into these broad groups, and I'm going to try and cover a little bit of each of these. I think it's fair to say that with just a half-hour, 40-minute talk, I'm not going to be able to go into great detail about iRecord. So I'm just going to touch on some of these things, and then I'm going to try and signpost you as to where you can find out more information. And I've got some exciting news at the end. So yeah, the four broad categories of things that people were wanting to get out of this were information on practical usage, such as submitting records of basic and advanced features of iRecord, including submission of a spreadsheet. I won't be covering spreadsheet uploads. That's a bit too complicated for today. So in order to get through everything, I'll try and cover just some basic functions in submitting records. People asked about how they can access the data. So how can they explore their own records? How can they download it for their local group? How can they extract the data that iRecord has for a site? So I thought I'd touch on what aspects of that are possible during this talk. There were some questions about biological recording in general. So remember, some people haven't submitted records before, so I'm going to do a brief introduction into biological recording. And then there were some people wanted to know about the systems and processes behind iRecord. So what is record validation and verification? How can you share records through, or how does iRecord allow the sharing of records? And again, there were people that were asking about that local link to recording. So how does iRecord link to local environmental record centres? So I'm going to briefly try and cover as much of that as possible as I can. It is untested, so I don't know how long the talk will take, but we will be finishing by 3:45. We may sacrifice some of the question and answer time for some demos on the actual iRecord website. When we get to that point of the talk, though, I will allow people to get in touch with Holly to interrupt with questions if I've gone too fast about something. All right, okay, so what is a biological record? I thought I'd make sure that we're all at the same point. So what is a biological record? Well, The definition of biological recording is the scientific study of the distribution of living organisms. And a biological record describes the presence, abundance, associations, and changes both in time and space of wildlife. So that sounds actually quite complicated. It's not an easy to read sentence, but in its most basic form, a biological record is just 4 pieces of information. So if you've got these 4 pieces of information, then it will constitute a basic biological record. So the first part of that information is who, so the person who's making the record. And this can quite often be the part that is forgotten when people are gathering data, but it's important to know who made the species determination and associate that with the record so that further information can be gathered down the line. Obviously, there's also what, so a biological record is talking about an organism. So yeah, what type of species is it? What type of animal or plant or fungi or bacteria are we talking about? Where? So where was this thing found? So a biological record is a point geographically as well, and it's also a point point in time as well. So the when is the 4th component of a record. So if you've got the who, what, where, when, you've got the basic components of a biological record. When we're collating that data, though, we have a thing called record resolution. So a record can be of a high resolution, which is better because it's better quality data, or a low resolution, which may still be useful, but may be useful for less things. So what affects the resolution of a record? Well, all of those 4 basic components can be both low or high in resolution. So obviously, to get a better resolution with the who, it's good to know the specific person that has made that record rather than the organization. So you do get some biological records that just state a company or an organization. So if any aspects of that record need to be questioned, it's harder to get that information. It's worth noting as well that the individual that was involved with the record, that can actually be several people at different stages. So the recorder, the term recorder refers to the person that made the observation, but there may be a different determiner. So I might take a photo of a beetle. I would therefore be the recorder, but I might not know what that beetle is, and I might ask an expert who then makes a determination. So they're the determiner. A species name is more precise and better than a family name or a very broad categorization of an animal or plant. So a record of a mammal would be of very little use because there is going to be a mammal anywhere you look. We need to know what kind of mammal it was. In terms of geographic location, some people will argue that the more precise, the better. And I think that's true to a point, but I think you need to take in the context of what you're recording and how you're recording it as well. So in my personal opinion, it's better to make sure that the resolution of the location of the grid reference, for example, is appropriate to what you're looking at. So if you're looking at your garden and doing a garden bird watch and observing the birds, trying to give a 1 meter squared grid reference for each bird is probably not any more useful than having a single grid reference that covers the whole of your garden in terms of people looking at it. And again, time. A date rather than a year is much more useful when people are looking at things like seasonal trends and changes in the first appearance of an organism throughout the year, things like that. So that's record resolution. There are a lot of other things that we can record. So a biological record at its most basic is those 4 pieces of information. But if we're explaining how it was recorded, so the sampling method, the type of habitat or microhabitat that it was found in, the number of the organism, the life stage, the sex of the organism, all of these different bits of information add value to the record, so they all increase the record quality. And the things that we would like to ask for different species groups may change depending on the species group. For example, sex is irrelevant for earthworms because they're all hermaphrodite, whereas it might be very important for a group like spiders. Right, so that's the very basics of what is a biological record. So I thought I'd go through a little bit about submitting biological records and why this is important. I'm going to make a very basic point here. On the left-hand side, you've got a map of records of the common carder bee from the NBN Atlas, and on the right, you've got a map if nobody was submitting records of the carder bee. You can see from those two maps, one tells us the distribution or the known distribution of the species. The other is just a blank map. And the point is really here, very simple point, that if we don't record wildlife, then we don't have that information about it. Submitting records has changed a lot over time. Traditionally, it would have been notebooks and record cards that were filled in and submitted, but it's got more structured over time, and we've made use of technology. And over time, more and more organisations have got involved in the collation and use of data, which is fantastic, but it can make things a little bit complicated. And I think that's why we got a lot of questions about how records can be used locally when I sent out that survey. So I'll try and explain a little bit later about how iRecord fits into that flow of data. On the right-hand side there, you can see how recording works for the National Earthworm Recording Scheme, so the scheme that I manage, and iRecord is a key part of that. Okay, I keep clicking out the window. Right, so what do records tell us about wildlife? So first of all, they tell us about the presence or absence. So this is a map of the presence of any earthworm, just earthworms. So the known presence of earthworms from research records from a paper that was published in 2009 by the Natural History Museum. And as you can see, there are large parts of the UK that apparently have no earthworms. Wales, despite all the fact that it has a lot of agriculture, doesn't seem to be very good for soil. It has no earthworms present. So biological recording can help fill those gaps. It can help tell us about where earthworms are present. We've done a little bit of work in Wales, but nowhere near enough with regards to earthworm records. But as well as simple presence or absence, it can also tell us about trends, so changes over time. So if we look at these maps here from the UK's, the state of the UK's butterflies in 2015, we can see from looking at two recording periods, so 2010 to 2014 and earlier 1970 to 1982, we can see that these two butterflies have their range has changed. So it can tell us about the trends and the expansions in their UK distributions. And we can look at the biological records outside of maps as well. So if we plot the known records from the National Bat Monitoring Programme's hibernation survey, we can start looking at how the greater horseshoe bat is doing in terms of its population. And I'm pleased to report there that there have been improvements in recent years in this protected species population. It also helps us track invasions. So here we've got a map showing the distribution of the red and grey squirrel and their overlap. So knowing where these species are recorded helps us protect the red squirrel and put in place conservation actions. And like I said, it's so much more than maps. This data here is on the left. This is the earthworm species composition data that Natural England published. I think it was back in 2012 on the left. Since then, the Earthworm Society of Britain has been collating records from biological recorders, and our knowledge of the composition of the different earthworm species has completely changed as a result of that. And that's because research traditionally on earthworms is done in agricultural or woodland habitats, whereas biological recorders cover a much broader range of habitats because they're out and about everywhere, and they're not just going where the money is. So it's told us that, for example, the Natural England report estimated that Alalobophora corotica, small green earthworm, makes up over a third of UK earthworms, when in fact we've found that it's just over 10% when we add in the Earthworm Society data. And it's worth noting that the Earthworm Society data there has the Natural England data in as well. Right, so why do you believe recording wildlife is important? So I'm going to give my voice a break here. I'm going to stop sharing my screen, and I'd just like to ask the rest of you, just drop it in the chat. Why do you think biological recording wildlife is important? So why is it important to you? So I'm just going to give you 1 minute to enter some points in there, rather than me lecture everybody about what I think. So we've got protection, so yeah, conservation work, and to ensure that that is evidence-based. Well, it's running away with me here. Yeah, more about, yeah, for research. Exactly. Biological recording can influence all sorts of types of research to monitor trends and identify threats. A lot more about conservation, climate change, to understand climate change and evidence the impact of that, yeah. To look at geographical trends, to look at the health of the environment. For planning and development, yeah, the way that the law is structured and the planning system is structured, if there are no records of wildlife within a local area, there can be a real threat to endangered species. Public engagement, yeah, understanding more about wildlife, and that enables us to try and get those people that maybe don't care quite as much as we do. The health of species, also the health of habitats and the health of specific sites. Individual feeling of getting involved, making a difference, yeah. Yeah. Do you know what I've not seen yet? I might have missed it, but nobody's put for fun. And do you know what? I do biological recording because I enjoy it, and I actually quite like going out and looking at wildlife. So you're all much more noble than I am, because I'm just doing it for kicks. Yeah, ecosystem health, learning. Yeah. Right, okay, I'm going to go back to sharing my screen. Sivi, I don't think it is just a side benefit. I think it's a real reason. And one of the most, I'm not sharing my screen, am I? There we go. One of the most recorded group by a long, long way are birds. And one of the reasons for that is because bird watching is such a popular hobby. So that generates so many records. All right, just check as well. Holly, if you nod, can everybody still hear me okay? I'm not dropping out, right? Good. Right, so now on to the main question. Why iRecord? Yeah. So why iRecord? So I thought I'd start by saying, what is iRecord? So iRecord is a free tool created by the Biological Record Centre to support naturalist and biological recording schemes and societies. So that's a very brief explanation of it is. So again, I've got a quick question. Can I still see? Yes, I can. Right, so I've got four platforms here. I wanted to know which one you think is the odd one out and why. Can I see the chat while I'm doing this? Holly, can you unmute yourself?
I can.
Oh no, I found it now. It's fine. Yeah, so Instagram's the odd one out, Savina. Well, I suppose Instagram is not about recording, but you can record while live using Instagram. So Instagram is not the odd one out. Everybody stop typing Instagram. iNaturalist, it doesn't feed into UK data. That's true. But Instagram doesn't automatically feed into UK data either. Any other suggestions? iSpot, there's no app. I wasn't aware of that, but no, that's not the reason. iRecord, Tony said, because it's got verifiers. iRecord. Right, good. Nobody's got the reason why I put that up. And it's just a point that I wanted to clarify, because I quite often hear people saying that iRecord can't be used for their group because their group cannot be identified from photos. iRecord is the only app there that that requires photos to function properly. So I believe you can submit iSpot and iNaturalist things without a photo, but it's not really what they were designed for. So iRecord is the odd one out from my perspective, because it's the only one that does not require a photo. A photo can be added, but you don't need a photo to make a worthwhile piece of post or input into iRecord. So that brings me on to what iRecord is not and what it is. So this is just a little bit of myth dispelling. So iRecord is not like iSpot and iNaturalist, which, for those who don't know, they center mainly on identification. So somebody submits a photo of something and they suggest what they think it is. Their suggestion might be that they actually know what it is as well. So there's different levels of confidence that people will post a picture with. And then the community that's on those applications will then either agree or disagree. So they were both designed to enable community identification and verification of species ID. iRecord is not that. What iRecord is also not is it's not a recording scheme. So another thing that I've heard from people is that there's no need for iRecord for their group because iRecord, they have a perfectly capable recording scheme. So I just want to clarify that iRecord is not a recording scheme. What iRecord is it's actually supported, and it was developed by the Biological Records Centre. And for those who don't know, it can be easy to confuse this with local environmental record centres, but they're not. The Biological Records Centre is, I forgot whether, I think it's a charity now, but when it was set up, it was a government agency that was set up to support the recording schemes. So, for example, with the British Myriapod and Isopod group, it helps them with their website management, and for the Earthworm Society of Britain, it's helped us create an iRecord form and a standard way of collating earthworm data. So it's not there. iRecord is not there to replace recording schemes. It's been built by the organisation that is there to support the recording schemes. And BRC are very happy to work with recording schemes to get iRecord to work for the recording scheme. What it also is, and I think it's good to clarify this because it is a website and it is a tool, but really, in essence, it's a quite advanced form of record submission. So traditionally, this would have been recording cards. More recently, it would be through databases like MapMate and Recorder6 that some recording schemes use. What iRecord does is it provides an online record submission pathway for recording schemes. So it's not really, it's like a really, really advanced spreadsheet. That's the way I like to think of it. So when people say that they already have a recording scheme for a group, this is a tool that the recording scheme can use. It's not a replacement. What it's also not, just to clarify, is it's not a local environmental record centre. and it's not there to replace them in any way. iRecord actually have a statement on their website stating that they will share their data with the local record centre. So the local record centre just needs to get in touch with them to sort that out. Now, a disadvantage of iRecord that I'll be honest about, that maybe hasn't been completely solved yet, is that some record centres don't yet engage with it. And I've been told by some record centres that that's just to do with the sheer amount of data that's on there and ensuring that it's sorted out properly and it's not duplicated. So there are still some hurdles that we need to get over, but Siri has come to life. Stop it. Yeah, so it's not a replacement for record centres, and it's actually set up so that record centres can get the data from there if they want to. That's not always as easy as we'd like it to be, but it's a work in progress. And some record centres actually use iRecord as their main method of gathering data. It's also not a replacement for the NBN Atlas. So the NBN Atlas is the standard tool that people use to draw down records and download records. So we had a few requests for information about how to download data from iRecord. Now you can download data, but what you can download depends on your involvement with iRecord. So for example, I can download all of the earthworm data, but that's because I'm the national recorder for earthworms. Apart from that, I can only really download my own data. You can download species lists and some information, but not the full records. And iRecord is not supposed to do that job. That is what the NBN Atlas and local environmental record centres are there for. So why iRecord? I'm going to whiz through this because I want to get on to actually showing you some demos of iRecord and leave some time for questions. So what does iRecord do for the recording network? Well, first of all, it's an online system, so it makes data validation really simple. So data validation is a process of taking a piece of data, a piece of information, and making sure that it's in the correct format. So if we take my birthday, the 4th of July, then the way that data could be submitted to me as part of an earthworm record varies tremendously. And these are some examples of how people could submit it. So one thing that people who collate data need to do is get everything in the same format. iRecord does this automatically by only allowing people to enter it a certain way, or having systems for automatically changing it into one format. It will do the same for grid references and things like that. It will know if a grid reference, for example, a grid reference should always be an even number. It will know if an uneven number is submitted, that grid reference is invalid. It will check species names against a dictionary that we have of UK species names. So it solves a lot of problems that you get when records are submitted on paper or in spreadsheets. And that's my personal experience from collating a data set. It also allows record submission, which we've talked about previously, so I won't go too much into that, but it provides a platform for members of the general public or members of a recording scheme to submit data to a recording scheme, if the recording scheme are engaging with iRecord. But yeah, it allows submission of data. It also facilitates verification. So it allows what we call a verifier, and this may be somebody like me that manages a scheme, it may be a county recorder, or it may be somebody working on a specific project. It allows them to query whether a record should be classed as accepted or valid or not. So in the example pictures here, we've got a nursery web spider. So if that image was submitted alongside that record, you can clearly tell from that image that that spider is the spider that I've said it is. The photo on the right would be regarded as incorrect because that is not a common frog, that is a common toad. That's how it works with photos, but verification can take many forms, and I'll give a quick demo later of how I verify earthworm records to demonstrate that it isn't all about photos. The other thing that I don't think we should forget is that it allows personal record collation, so it can act as a personal database. And one thing that I sometimes think some of my fellow recording schemes fail to understand is that the individual recorder might be contributing to a high and varied number of recording schemes. And if we've got a different submission pathway for each of those recording schemes, it can turn into quite a lot of work. And iRecord allows people to submit to many different schemes in one place. It also allows them to keep all of their data in one place, because what may be of interest to a recorder is a list of records across multiple tasks. So their interest may be a specific local site that they're looking after. So having all that data in one place is really useful for them as well. So while I'm trying to convince you why iRecord's great, I thought I'd give you some stats from the site as well. So there are gaps, but there are currently 713 registered verifiers on iRecord. So that is 713. It will be mainly people doing it in a voluntary capacity as well, that go on there and check the quality of the records and convert them from unconfirmed records into either confirmed or rejected records. I'm going to look at a piece of paper I've been sent as well. So if I'm looking down, that's what it's at. So there are 9,393,848 records that have been made available to iRecord for verification purposes. And I think this is a really important number, because as a recording scheme manager or organizer, I got access to a lot of records that would never have got to me otherwise. So yes, my recorders submit through iRecord now that would have always sent me the records, whether it be through a spreadsheet, on the back of an envelope, whatever. But there were records that I got through iRecord where the individual recorder would never have sent it to me, because earthworms are not their main focus. So I think that's really important. Of those, 5,163,303, this was as of the 27th of April, were verified as accepted. Only 58,545 have been not accepted, and 3,601,888 are currently pending verification. Now, pending verification can mean a couple of things. It could be that a verifier has queried it and they haven't had the decision back yet. It could be that a verifier hasn't got to them yet. Like I said, a lot of the verifiers are volunteers. Or it could be that there is no verifier for that group. So some records that go onto iRecord will not get verified currently. And until we have a recording scheme that is engaging with iRecord and sorting through those, then they won't. It's worth mentioning that iRecord is work for the verifiers, so it's understandable that not all recording schemes have the capacity to deal with it. But those records that are waiting there and verified will still be there in a year, or in 2 years, or in 3 years. So if you're submitting a record for a group where there is no current verifier for it, it doesn't mean that they won't be verified in the future. Until 2014, earthworm records went into a black hole on iRecord. Until last year, I don't think anybody was doing the mollusks. And I've noticed that my mollusk records are getting verified by Ben Rosen, who's the recording scheme organizer for non-marine mollusks. So the situation gets better as more people engage with it. There's 266,449 users. So plenty of people are contributing to it. And I think it's also worth noting that it's a significant contributor to the NBN Atlas. So if we take, for example, Diptera records from 2020, so far this year, Diptera records, which are true flies, on the NBN Atlas, there was only 1,394 records on the NBN Atlas. of them, 1,373 derive from iRecord linked data sets. So that is 98% of the Diptera records for this year that are currently on the NBN Atlas were processed through iRecord. So that tells us of the importance to the data sharing. All right. So what time are we on? 1:15. I'm going to skip through this. This was just a demonstration I was going to give about who can access the data. So now Boris is feeling better. He's obviously wanting to get on with his earthworm recording. And he's been down to St. James's Church in Piccadilly in London and recorded an earthworm, which he obviously preserved, identified, used a microscope and the correct ID key, because Boris wouldn't do it any other way. Who do we want to be able to access the data? Well, Boris should be able to access his data. We want the local site to be able to access the data. The earthworm site is the recording scheme. Keiron for God's Acre is a project that we'd like to be able to access that data. And then the local environmental records centre for London is Giggle. Currently, it would only really be the record centre, the recording scheme and Boris that could access that data, unless a thing called an iRecord activity was used and set up so that the other organisations could access them as well. And that's possible, but I'm going to cover that in my next virtual meetup that I'm speaking at in in about a month's time. So I'm going to skip over that and get to the, yeah. So I wanted to just give a couple of demos on the site and show you how to submit records and some basics. So for submitting records, using one of the basic forms, iRecord has 2 tabs, which I'll show you in a minute. You can also look through your records and explore your data, and we'll demo that a little bit. And there's some nice, interesting tools like species, like recorder league tables and things like that. I'll come to that later. So I'm going to, I need to stop my share. Right. So I'm going to quickly show you some demos. At this point, if you want to ask a question, or if I'm going too fast on something, or you need something clarified, if you put your hand up, Holly will interrupt me and we'll get your question asked then. But I have
one question in the chat now, sorry, just before we move on. Yeah. Max is asking, how is the data licensed on NBN?
So sharing data with the NBN from iRecord is not automatic. It's up to the individual recording scheme how they share their data, and even if they share their data with the NBN. So a lot of recording schemes do, but not all, and there are various reasons for that. When you're submitting data to the NBN, you apply a Creative Commons license. So the options are that it can be an open government license, which means it can be used for anything, no restrictions. It can be a public domain license and a CC0 license, which means anybody can use it for anything. It's the public version of an open government license. There's a Creative Commons by attribution license where the data just needs to be attributed to the organization that's put the database on there. And then finally, there's a non-commercial license. So that is set usually at the dataset level by the organization that is submitting the data. So I see there's some more questions about downloading records and things like that. What I'm going to do is I'm going to move on to the demos, because they may answer some of those questions. If you've got a specific question about the demo or you haven't understood anything, then put your hand up or drop the message in the chat, and either Sophie or Holly will interrupt me. Right. I need to move to this one. Can you all see iRecord there, Holly? Yes? No? Right, okay. First things first, I'm going to show you how to submit a record, because I think that's the most basic thing. So this is the main, once you're logged into iRecord, you'll get, this is the screen that you'll see. So you'll see a map here. You can see details of recent sightings that are relevant to me, and you've got this menu bar at the top. So on the top, you've got record, which we'll go to in a second, explore, which is for looking through data, activities, which we're not really going to cover on this session, summarize, which is a little bit like explore. Verify is something that you won't see. It's only the verifiers that will see that. You've got forum, which is a site discussion forum. On here, there's a lot of threads and topics. So there's a lot of information there, and you can ask questions there as well. And then you've got a help menu here as well with all sorts of guidance. One thing I'd like to point out on there is the iRecord user guidance is a fantastic free to download training manual that was created by Steve Garland from the Taniptra project, and you can download that for free there. We'll send a link to this in the follow-up email. So for submitting a record, there's two basic forms: enter a casual record or enter a list of records. So I'm going to show you the enter a list of records, because quite often when I'm submitting a record, it's of more than one species. So I've been looking out my patio doors as I've been working today, any excuse, and I've seen two birds in my garden. So I've seen a robin and a wood pigeon. They're not coming out in the rain in mass numbers today, unfortunately. So I'm gonna show you how to submit a record of a robin and a wood pigeon. So first thing it asks me is this record destination. That's coming up because I'm part of a few activities, so just ignore that. So the date, really simple. I can enter the date in as normal, or I can use the calendar function here. So it was today. Now, a little tip for iRecord, you've got these little padlocks here. These padlocks allow you to lock a piece of information, so that if you're submitting several records, so let's say I was submitting my bird records from my garden over the past 3 or 4 days, so I'd need to enter data 3 or 4 times, I can lock certain fields so that when I go into the next record, the data is already filled in for me, and you simply click on it to lock or unlock that. So the recorder name here is automatically filled in, but I can edit it because I'm logged into my account, so it's automatically assuming it's me. So for species, iRecord won't let you submit an incorrect species name. So you can, if you start typing in the name, it'll start giving you suggestions of what it thinks that you're going to say. So if I put in robin, there's a drop down here. Now you've got to be careful with this, that you don't just select the first thing. First thing that comes up is this genus Robinia, which is a type of flowering plant. So I want to make sure I've got the right one, which is the bird, Erythacus rubecula. And then if I type in the number, I didn't record the sex, it was an adult. And you can also type in any additional comments you've got here or add a photo. Now, I don't have any additional comments or photo. I also saw a single wood pigeon. And that one was a male adult, again, 1. A little tip with this is if you fill in your first line properly before you start entering your second one, it will assume that the sex stage identified are going to be the same. So if you're entering a load of similar records in, that makes it much easier. Every time you enter a new line will appear underneath in case you want to add more. So when you filled in the information about what you've seen, you then go to the Where Was It tab, and I'll type in the name of the street I live in. I never put my address on here. I only ever put the street name because it's good not to put that kind of personal information on there. And then I need to find where I am now. Because I've entered this before, it's automatically selecting, but I can zoom in and out of this map and I can choose on the map where it is. Yeah. So it is actually this big square here. Oh, so I need to zoom out one more time. Yeah. So I've selected that square now, so it puts a grid reference in the enter a spatial reference. Now, if I'd entered that grid reference, if I knew the grid reference because I'd taken it off a GPS or something, I could enter that in and it'll zoom in on the map where it was. So if we put, I'll move somewhere else, there we go. If I then enter that grid reference, it's moved back to that square. You then, oh, okay. I submitted my record by accident there. I must have pressed enter. So, sorry about that. Yeah, so after the habitat, there was just a comments box where you can put anything in, and then there was a blue button at the bottom saying submit. I'd leaned on the enter key on my keyboard, so I accidentally submitted that a bit early. So yeah, there's a good example of what not to do. And then that record then will have been submitted, yeah, hopefully. Come on. Yeah, one thing with iRecord, it can be a little bit slow, the website sometimes, so sometimes you do need to bear with it a little bit. And it might be because I've got several windows open as well. All right, okay. Yeah, so another feature of iRecord is that you can explore your own data. So to clarify, you can explore all the records as well, but you won't be able to download all of the records, but you can explore your own records. So if I go to explore my records, then what will happen is all of my records will come up here. So I've got iRecord set to know that I record in the London area. So it has this blue barrier around London to show the area I normally record in. And then down here, you've got all of the records that I've submitted. So we can see here my most recent records of a robin and a wood pigeon. And if I wanted to go in and edit those, I can click on the record there. The one below is to view it. That one there is to edit it. And it'll bring up an editable version. So if I've made a mistake, like I did there, I can go in and I can edit what I put in. So if I'd put the wrong grid reference or I'd forgot to put the habitat in, I can add them in. So you can see there that it asks me for a broad habitat and a more specific habitat. There's a comments box, and then there's the submit. Right, so that's submitting a record. Does anybody have a question? Any questions about submitting a record?
There's a few questions in the chat, Keiron, that came up then. I was wondering, there's someone called Nilton A. I was wondering if they could expand on their question, because they asked, what is the best way to identify species? I'm not sure if they're on about a particular group. So if you could.
Yeah, so for identification, iRecord is not an ID tool. So for identification, I would always recommend getting in touch with the relevant recording scheme and asking for their advice. Quite often you'll find advice on recording a specific group on the website of the recording scheme. So for example, if you were wanting information on recording spiders, going to the British Arachnological Society's website and having a look at their information on recording and identifying spiders will be useful. Quite often they'll direct you to a number of ID resources. We can add it into the follow-up email, but we've got a tool called the ID Resource Finder that helps you find ID resources for a specific group. But you can, the verifier that's getting in touch with you might ask you how you've identified it to be able to verify your record. Are there any questions specifically about submitting records?
Sivy asked, can data be submitted and then downloaded so that the recorder can submit it to a LBRC along with other records they may be submitting?
Yeah, so if you go to Explore Records, here you've got a download option. Oh, bear with me one sec. if you click on download, you'll come up to the iRecord download records page. I'll have a few more options here because I have a few activities and I'm a verifier. But if you download my records for reporting, then you can then download all of your data. So if we look here, if I want to download my data from the 1st of January 2018 to, if I want to do it to the current day, I can leave that blank. There are several different formats you can download it in, but if I just want a spreadsheet, I leave it in comma separated. If I download that, then you see here I've got a spreadsheet that's downloaded that has all of my records in. If I open, can you see my Excel there or not?
No.
Not yet.
No. Yeah, so that has just downloaded this spreadsheet. Can you see that?
Yeah.
So yeah, so you've got all the species records there. iRecord assigns what we call a record key. So this is a unique identifier for that record. So this is designed to help prevent duplication of records. So if you're submitting records you're downloading them and submitting them on, make sure that you keep that record key because that will enable them to link it back to that record if they get it from somewhere else as well. So that's how you download records. It's really simple. The more records you're downloading, the more time that will take as well. So if you were downloading a huge number of records, it might take a while for that to download. Okay. Are there any more questions to do with exploring your records or downloading your records or submitting a record?
Bear with me a second, there's a lot going on in the chat. I'm trying to read through it now.
While you're doing that, I'll just show you something on Explore My Records as well.
Keiron,
Yeah.
I've been keeping an eye on the end of the chat, and there's lots of questions about photos. How do you add a photo? And do verifiers need photos in order to be able to verify a record? And there's a definite theme of questions surrounding photos there. So
Okay.
do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, so I'll clarify kind of something I said earlier. iRecord allows the use of photos, but it is not all about photos. So does a photo help with verification? I can safely say that it's never going to hurt. So it doesn't hurt to submit photos. However, whether the photo is any use for verification depends on a number of things. It depends on whether the photo is any good. I have seen photos of a blurry dot when I worked at the Bat Conservation Trust that people would send a dark picture in the attic of a blurry dot, and they'd want to know what bat species that is. Now, anybody who knows bats knows that they're really difficult to ID from a photo. Some species impossible anyway. However, if the photo is of poor quality, you don't stand a chance. However, a blurry photo of a robin in the garden might be enough for the verifier to be able to actually say, yeah, I can see from that it is that. There's nothing else it could be from that photo. So the quality of the photo and the difficulty the difficulty with regards to the species in terms of ID. If people submit a whole organism photo of an earthworm to me, it's often of little use in saying what species it is. Sometimes it tells me that it's not something. What my recorders will use the photo option for is sending me pictures of specific features down the microscope. So, two things. First of all, the photo tool is very useful, but it's a tool on iRecord, and it shouldn't be forgotten that it's there as a tool to help the verifiers. So, whole organism photos are only helpful for certain species or certain groups. but that doesn't mean that those animals and plants that cannot be identified with a photo can't make good use of the photo function. So hopefully that answers those questions. But if we look, what I'll do is I'm going to show you the Verify tab. So this is what happens behind the scenes when records come in. So when any earthworm records come in and they're not yet looked at, this is what it'll look like. So I've got all these records here. And what I can then do is I can click on the photos to look at, to help me determine whether the record is verifiable or not. So if I start with these ones from Keiron Anderson, so these do not have a photo, they cannot be identified with a photo of these groups. I have two options in terms of accepting this, and two options in terms of rejecting it, and then one in between. So can you see these buttons here? These are the different levels of verification. So this one here is, it is definitely correct. This one here is, it's considered correct. So I would only say something is definitely correct if I can ascertain from the information I've been given that it is definitely correct. And I will only say that if I've been sure, if there's photographic evidence that allows me to say for sure that I can ID it, or if I've seen a voucher specimen. Considered correct means that I trust the record for whatever reason. So that might be because the person is an expert, or because the person has had sufficient training, or because they've provided me with sufficient information that I think I would have reached the same conclusion. There's this one here which is plausible, which means the record could be correct, but there's no way of saying for certain. Yeah, and then there's this one here that is not accepted, unable to verify. I don't really understand what the difference between these two terms is, if I'm honest, because they both mean you're unable to confirm that the species ID is correct. And then there's this one here which is not accepted, definitely incorrect. And that means, like, if somebody sent me a picture of a beetle and said it was an earthworm species, then I would be ticking that one. And saying this is definitely not correct. I can tell from the photo that this is not what you say it is. I rarely use that one, to be honest, because most people will be sending me a picture of, will be sending me a record of something that's plausible. So those are the options. If I look at my records here, so when I click on a record, so if I look at Keiron's record here, I can see all the data he's given me here. Now he's put on occurrence comment here, verified by Keiron Brown, and what he means there is that he actually brought the specimen to me and I checked it under a microscope. So what I can do, where is it?
And I've got a couple of hands up. Is it
Yeah.
okay? Question. So there's Terry Burke, you've got your hand up. Do you want to unmute yourself and ask Keiron your question, please? Terry there?
Sorry, my question was answered earlier in that I was querying about whether you really needed a photograph or not. Certainly a verifier I would have thought would require a photograph.
Well, it is a good question, but the way I use iRecord, it's not the be all and end all of the record submission and verification process. So these records here from Keiron, he's just not put them on until I've had a look at them. So I don't need a photo because I've actually seen this specimen under the microscope in person. So I know that that is 100% correct, and I'll accept it as such, and I'll say verified by voucher specimen. So voucher specimen means that you've seen the actual organism, and that can be a preserved specimen, or it might, yeah, if you were there and saw it in life, it might be that you saw that. I might have been with Keiron when he saw something in life. So I don't want people to get too hung up on photos. So I've got a record here from a recorder that I don't know, Bruce Phillip. I can actually have a look to see if he's submitted records before. and he hasn't submitted earthworm records before, so I'm right not to know who he is. So I have no way of knowing whether he has any experience in recording earthworms. So rather, I could just outright reject his record, but that seems a bit unfair. It could have 10 years of experience of identifying and researching earthworms that I just don't know about. So what I would do here is I would query it. So I'd click on this button here, and that would raise a query box, and then I can ask him a load of questions. So I would, here's the information that I'd like to ask him that I've prepared earlier, and I can put that in there. So what I'm doing here is I'm asking him 4 questions. So I'm asking him to tell me how he identified it, what key did he use, was the earthworm identified live or dead? And that's because earthworms are very difficult to identify live, so that would ring alarm bells. Was the earthworm identified using a microscope, and what experience does he have? Now, depending on his answer, I might be able to accept that record based on the information. So that's why I don't want people to get too hung up on photos. Just bear in mind that some recording schemes may require that you send a photo of an organism in order for them to accept it. And that's not because they don't trust you, it's because they're trying to maintain a certain level of record quality.
We've got a couple of questions about recording schemes, actually, Keiron.
Yeah.
So Phil has asked, if you're submitting to a particular recording scheme, would it be advisable to submit the same record to iRecord?
So for that, I would always check with the recording scheme. So if you contact me about earthworms, I'll tell you to submit it through the earthworm form on iRecord. So I'll give you guidance of how I'd like you to submit it through iRecord, because we have a special form that gathers specific information about earthworms. And I'll be able to tell you that I get it through that. My advice for any group is to check with the recording scheme. It's also worth noting as well, though, that the records that you're submitting are your records. You're doing it for whatever reasons that you have. So it's worth thinking about that and thinking about looking into making sure that the record will go to the right organization. So if you're wanting to get all your records locally to the record centre, it may be a case of liaising with the local record centre, preferably as well as the recording schemes, but it's up to you what your priorities are. So I've just seen a comment from Lawrence about it seeming a bit unscientific. Was that with regards to the verification, Lawrence?
No, sorry, it was just a comment on something someone else said earlier.
Oh, okay.
It wasn't directly related to what you were talking about.
Okay, just because I was going to explain, that's why it's good to have a set protocol for doing it. So, but that's fine if it was about something else.
Sorry, there's Jane Lowe who's had her hand up for a while. Jane, yeah. Do you want to ask your question? I can't see her here.
Jane, are you there? Jane, if you can't ask your question because you don't have a microphone, just drop your message in the chat and Holly will pick it up. Yeah. Are there any more questions?
I'm just trying to read the chat now.
Sophie, if you've got any questions that you're ready with in the chat, then feel free to unmute yourself and ask them.
You sent them to me already, Keiron. I've gone.
Okay.
So there were a couple of questions earlier that were asking how often you should submit records. So you were talking about the birds in your garden. Should you be sending in those records every day, or how often should you do it?
Again, I would speak to the recording scheme about what they want. With earthworms, if you're sampling your garden every day, I'd say that's probably too much, and because you're taking specimens and having to preserve them, kill them and preserve them, it's going to be damaging to the population in your garden if you're doing that every day. So there are lots of things to consider with frequency. I think with my birds in my garden, I used to do it. I used to do it every day, and I think there is some value to that, because but but it's always worth checking with the scheme or project that you're recording for, because they'll know what's meaningful for them. Some things will be annual, some things might be daily, some things might be monthly or seasonally. It depends on the group and what questions you're wanting to answer.
Okay. Tarek's got their hand up. Do you want to unmute yourself and ask your question, please?
Yes, thanks. Hi, Keiron. My question's about the links between the Great Britain Non-Native Species Secretariat website and their INS tracker tool. At a meeting I went to earlier this year, there was some talk of them shifting over to using iRecord. And when I record non-native species in my work, I tend to use INS Mapper or INS Tracker. Is it now true that I can just use iRecord and it is captured or drawn down into INS Tracker?
I don't know enough about that, Tarek, I'm afraid. For that, I'd recommend getting in contact with the Non-Native Species Secretariat and asking for their advice. But saying that, my understanding is that they do keep a close eye on iRecord and that they pick up any non-native species that are recorded through there. As a recording scheme organiser, I get an email every year from them through the Biological Record Centre asking if and what records we've had of non-native earthworms, to which the answer has been none every single year.
Okay, great, thanks for that.
Right, we've got a couple more hands up and I'm quite conscious of time now. So Sivi, do you want to ask your question, please?
So just really quickly, for some species groups, or at least some species, people might actually be experts enough to be verifiers, though they're not listed as verifiers. Is there anything they can submit with their record just to save time so that whoever's the verifier for that species in iRecord can say they may have 10 years worth of Great Crested Newt experience? If they're submitting a Great Crested Newt record, it's verified.
Yeah. So for some of the forms and activity, some of the forms that groups have created. So for example, if you enter a record through the earthworm form of an earthworm, it asks you what ID resource you used, and that question is there to help me as a verifier so that I don't have to ask that question to people that have filled in that form. The Mammal Society, their recording form as well, asks you what your experience is. So some forms will do that automatically. However, if you're wanting to relay that information, the comments box, you can put whatever you want in there. And personally, as a verifier, I welcome any and all information about the record, and that includes how reliable it is. So if somebody can tell me that they have lots of experience in there, it preempts some of my questions as a verifier. So if you're recording a species group where you think it's going to be picked up by somebody who may not know you, then definitely drop some notes in the record about, in the comments box of the record, about why you've come to that conclusion. Yeah.
Rosie's got her hand up as well. What was your question, Rosie?
Hi, Keiron. It was something that a few people have asked, but in terms of common species, things like the robin and stuff, obviously it's useful to record them at some point, but how regularly and like how much is it worth recording?
So again, it's really up to the recording schemes to advise on that specifically, but my guidance, so my personal opinion, is that we shouldn't treat common things any differently from rare things. If we only record the rare things, then it distorts the data. So if, for example, let's say I was going to record a robin once a month, but I was going to record something a bit rarer. This is where my lack of knowledge of birds comes in. A rare bird. I've never seen a ringneck parakeet in my garden. I live in London, so let's say a ringneck parakeet. But I was going to record one of them every time I see it. If somebody was looking into my recording habits, it might look like I see the two species as frequently as each other. And bear in mind that those records are associated with my name. If they're for a specific survey as well, then you could be skewing the data. So I record, if I'm recording the stuff in my garden, Every time I do that, there will be a robin and there will be a grey squirrel pretty much, and there will be a wood pigeon. But I don't miss them out because they're common, because I think that distorts the data. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Oh, we've got 2 more hands up, Keiron. Do you want me to go through them?
Yeah, that's fine. That's fine.
Okay. If anyone does need to go, that's fine. We don't mind if you leave us. Mark, you've got your hand up. What was your question?
Well, it was more of an observation. iRecord is often verified by people giving of their own time, and often as a former recorder and verifier, you get this my record. Now, in terms of moth trapping, which I did for 10 years continually in my garden, I just flicked a switch and then nature took over. So I didn't anything. I was bestowed with luck, or I had things fly in. So I just think people could do with bearing in mind how a lot of the verification's done, you know, and Keiron's shown you how much time he's got involved. The other thing is people just put pictures up and ask for a verification without a date and an area that it came from, so you can't even use the phonology. So when submitting records, think about the time other people, I mean, most people know of Roger Morris and Stuart Ball. Roger at the moment is inundated during lockdown with the records people are providing, let alone once the breaks come off. So the more quality and surrounding detail you provide, the better. And last point I'd make, how much of a grid reference the holly blue in somebody's garden, if it's a rangy, flying, fast-moving insect, people like Stuart Roberts from Bee Wars uses a 1K square, you know, to put bees into, unless you're talking about where you've seen them coming in and out of a nest box in the wall or something like that. So ask people that are recording and on these societies for as much input. There's very few hard and fast rules, but there are many ways to furnish and grease the rails which will make your enjoyment of how you're received and records are used better. That's enough of my time and yours, sorry.
Yeah, no, it's a good point, Mark, and I'll just reiterate kind of what I said earlier, that don't be afraid to put in the comments which ID resource you used, or if somebody helped you with it. And if you submitted the photo to iSpot, then you can explain that you've done that and things like that. So yeah. Any more questions?
There's one more hand up, Robert Bell.
Hello.
Hi, Keiron.
Hi, Rob. Long time no see.
I know. Good presentation. Just a question. If you're submitting, basically, when I put stuff into iRecord, I'd like it to be available to anybody that wants to use it, and you'd like to think it would go on NBN. Do you have to tick anything or make any selection within the software to kind of say, look, everyone can have it, or to get it onto NBN?
No, when you sign up as an iRecord user, you basically you give up all of that. The terms and conditions in iRecord are that they will be shared. So if anybody doesn't want to share their data, don't use iRecord. But yeah, you don't need to tick anything. How it's shared, though, will depend on the organizations that are downloading it. So it depends on the individual organization about how they want to share it. So if I take Earthworms as an example, we share our records with every record center and with the NBN and with the Global Biodiversity Information Facility. And we try to do it with local groups that we work with when we survey on their sites, but not every group shares it that much. And one thing, to go back to what Mark said, is a lot of these recording schemes are volunteer run. So sometimes the lack of sharing is more to do with the capacity of the individuals dealing with all the data than it is because they're trying to be super private with the data. Although there are some people that do that too.
Just one quick follow on from that then. So any record I put, so for example, I put an earthworm in casually, I think I've got it right, that would automatically go to the Earthworm Society who'd vet it before it went to NBN because you share it with NBN. And similarly, moth records, any taxa goes to some group who then,
No, because not all groups have somebody signed up for them. And the way it works varies across different groups. So with earthworms, they all come to me for the whole of the UK. With moths, for example, it's very much done at a county recorder level. And I would imagine that when you're looking at county recorders, even with organisations that engage with iRecord, they will be patchy. So it's always worth getting in touch with the recording scheme if you've got specific questions about that. But it's worth bearing in mind that even if there are gaps in the verification system at the moment, those gaps might be filled in the near or distant future, depending on the group. Like I've said, there are groups that weren't getting looked at, like Harvestmen. Harvestmen, there's somebody going through them now because I've had my Harvestmen records looked at. So it's not there's no simple answer to it, Rod, because we simply do not have the number of verifiers that we need to do all records of all groups.
No, that's great. Thanks.
All right, I think
We've got more. What do you want to do, Keiron? If anyone does need to leave, that's fine. You can disappear.
Holly, I've been having my hand waving. Can you not see me?
No.
I've been waving for a long time.
Okay, yeah, John, what's your question?
I've forgotten what it is now. Keiron, somebody said just now that records are just opinions unless they're compared with the type species, which to me seems completely bonkers. But that's because you never record anything. But what I do is when I enter a record, if I've got difficult species to determine, or you know, when you're going through the key, if you're an experienced key user of a particular type of key, and you get to a point where you just cannot decide, or whether something comes out as rare or naturally scarce or something, then I take that species and I take it to the Natural History Museum, or to the AMC, or to an expert, bully them into telling me what it is. And I put that then in the comment that it's been confirmed. I can't use the word verified, obviously, because that's controversial, but you can say it's been confirmed by a particular expert. And I don't see any problem with doing that. Certainly, that was Martin Harvey's advice to me.
Yeah, and I do quite often put on records where I've had them checked. So because of the Biolinks project delivers a lot of ID training within vertebrates, which means I have access to quite a lot of experts that I'm hosting at these sessions. So I quite often either hold off submitting the record until somebody's checked it, or I'll submit the record and say that the voucher specimen, the specimen is available to look at. And then sometimes people will ask you, some verifiers might ask you to post a specimen to them. So, yes.
It's difficult. I would say having a record as an opinion is a reasonably valid point, but you're having informed opinions. Otherwise, you know, you never get anything recorded.
And I think, John, to follow on from that, with a record is just an opinion. It is, but that's why it's important to have these verification protocols, because what they do is they help us increase the reliability of that opinion, and they give us a framework for saying which opinions we will trust and which we will not. And yeah, I mean, we could argue that there's no such thing as what is a species as well? There's endless arguments you could go into there. Which we
there will be errors in the system too, but I mean, you know, hopefully they'll come out in the wash. In the sense, there'll be so many records submitted that one or two errors really don't matter. And I think that's important to understand. These are statistics.
Yeah, I think what we'll probably do now, Holly, is wrap it up as well.
Yeah, we have gone over time. Thank you everyone for sticking with us.
But one last thing, Holly, I want to say.
Yeah.
So something that I just want to mention to everybody is, obviously we haven't covered everything today. What am I doing? That's the wrong one. Yeah, we haven't covered everything today, but what we're developing at the moment is an actual online training course on iRecord, which will be called Discovering iRecord, and that will involve weekly sessions, a little bit like this, but covering specific topics in detail. And the idea is it will be aimed at beginners and those fairly new to iRecord, and it will go through some of the things in more detail that we haven't been able to go through today. So we'll have more information about that coming soon. But I just wanted to mention that we've got it coming, and anybody who signed up to our newsletter will get information about that when we've got it. Okay. Yeah. Now I'm done, Holly.
Okay, I think we'll call it a day then. Yeah, thank you everyone for coming along. Yeah, we've got more sessions coming up as well, so if there are more questions. Yeah, thank you. Enjoy the rest of the day.
Can I just
Very much indeed.
Yeah.
When you say raise your hand, some people have been doing it physically.
Oh, really?
Some people have been doing it on the little raise hand thing. So which?
I mean the raise hand thing when I say raise hand.
So that's why poor John was waving around for about half an hour and not getting anywhere.
Oh, sorry, John.
If you go on to participant, there's a little thing that says raise hand, which I've done. But
we'll cover that.
I can't see that. Where is it?
At the bottom, participants. If you're on a PC.
Or at the top of an iPad.
I got you.
Yeah, if you click on that, you've got yes, no, raise hand, whatever. But I did raise my electronic hand, but has it come up?
Yeah.
Yes, it is. I can see
okay.
it.
I'm going to lower your hand now, Nigel. I've took
Cool. Thank you.
I got it. I got it.
Very much
I got
indeed.
it.
It's really
Bye.
good. Thank you.
Okay. Bye then.
Thank you, everybody. Goodbye.
Goodbye, all.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you, and thank you, Holly. Bye.
Thank you very much indeed.
Bye.
Goodbye.
Thanks all.
Thank you.
I think we've got Louise still with a raised hand. She had it raised for a while. I think she might have gone now.
Right, okay. Let's help people get out that are getting stuck.
We've got a couple of new raised hands that have just appeared.
Are those raised hands questions? If they are, just unmute yourself and ask away, and I'll see if I can briefly answer it.
I don't think Mags will be able to do an unmute. I think Mags has not got a microphone.
Oh, okay.
Hi, Sharon. Just to say, I didn't manage to submit a chat, so I don't know what I was not doing.
There's a chat function.
Yeah, I've got the chat function. I typed it all in, and I couldn't see how to send it off to you.
Just press enter. Are you on
right. Just the enter button. Okay, sure. Yeah,
right.
Thank you.
Mags has asked a question. I did see it.
Yeah. So one thing I did just want to quickly ask is kind of large data sets. So we've got a spreadsheet of records from 2011 to 2015. Is there an easy way of kind of just?
Yeah, there is a spreadsheet upload, but I've never managed to do it successfully. I would get in contact with iRecord directly about that.
Okay, it's something that we're working on, trying to just go through some, busy seasons, and you go to submit a record and you realise you've missed a year or.
Yeah, no, there is a need for that, definitely, and iRecord has that feature, but it's a more advanced feature to use. So I would get in touch with iRecord and ask for their help with it. It's something. It's on my to-do list to do exactly the same with all the earthworm records I've got from research organisations that haven't been uploaded to iRecord. But yeah. So, Mags's question: any way to send queries once this is finished? If you mean queries about the session, then yeah, our email is biolinkes@field-studies-council.org, and that is in the emails that we've been sending to you about this session. So if you go back to one of those emails, you should be able to find that email and drop us an email. Yeah.
Keiron.
Yeah.
One thing that you could mention, I don't know, you might be mentioning it anyway in the follow-up email, but people can drop follow-up questions in the forum if they want. Any questions they've got that they didn't get a chance to answer.
Yeah, we could. Yeah, I think I'd rather keep that for the trial of the course, so it doesn't